So today we are at the site of the Pennsylvania Live Steamers. It is a live steam club founded in 1946 in Paoli, Pennsylvania. It was basically formed by a bunch of machinists after the war who were building small, mostly 3/4 scale and 1-inch steam engines, and we're looking for a place to run them. So they started a club in Paoli, Pennsylvania, and we're there until about 1970, 71, when they had to leave. They had to leave the property, so they relocated to Ron's, Pennsylvania, not far outside of Collegeville, Pennsylvania. Moved here, started building the club around 1970, and have been here ever since. The basic basis of the club is we have 1.5-inch scale, 1.5 scale engines that run on 7 1/4 track. That's this track right here. That's 7 1/4 gauge. Between the gauge between there and there, that's the gauge. And that's 7 1/4. A lot of parts of the country are 7 1/2, but most of the East Coast and certain areas are 7 1/4. So it's an 1.5-inch scale, 7 1/4 gauge. And over here, we're doing some work right now. We also have 1-inch scale, which is 4 3/4 gauge. Smaller gauge, smaller scale. This is 1-inch scale. What that means is, like, 1-inch scale, it's every foot of an actual engine. If you're making a model of it, it's 1 inch. So if a part of your engine's 3 feet, you're making it scaled down to a model, you're scaling it down to 3 inches. Just like 1.5 inches. You know, to every foot on the real engine, on the model, that foot equals 1.5 inches. We also have a multi-gauge loop, which is over here past the turntable. That is multi-gauge. That you can run 1 inch. It's a loop. You can get to the turntable, and you can get to the transfer table from the multi-gauge loop, but it's basically its own separate loop, not connected to the rest of the railroad. That's got 4 3/4 gauge. I think it's got 3 gauges, from 4 3/4 all the way down to 2.5-inch gauge. I don't think I've ever seen anyone run 2.5-inch gauge, but 4 3/4 is another one. So this is the yard, which has both 1-inch and 1.5-inch scale engines. Walk down here. It's quite a steep grade. Probably steeper than you see on a real railroad leaving our yard. And he goes underneath the multi-gauge loop. Like I said, in the multi-gauge loop, that has 3 different gauges all in one track. I'll show you when it passes the main line up top. I'll show you then. We got working signals, just like the real railroad. Most everything about it is pretty much like the real thing. Tunnels, bridges, cost. Definitely not a cheap hobby. Luckily, I'm able to build most of my own stuff, so I'm able to have stuff. If I didn't build my own stuff, I probably wouldn't have much. Then we got a tunnel here. One of the projects that's been going on here at the club is switching wood ties to plastic ties. That's a composite plastic, kind of like some of that decking you can buy. I'm told it's a different kind of composite, but still. It's not wood, and it's supposed to last 30 some years. We shall see. So here's the tunnel. When you come out of the yard, the 1-inch scale comes out through this tunnel from the yard. 1.5-inch scale comes this way out of the yard, and then each scale has its own portal through the tunnel. And like I said, 1-inch scale is 4 3/4 gauge. 1.5-inch scale is 7 1/4 gauge. We're going to go through the tunnel. This is always a lot of people, especially people who are new to the club, love coming through here. I like the tunnel too. There's a light at the end of the tunnel. And then we come out. Some of the guys call this the horseshoe curve. There's other nicknames for it, because it looks like a horseshoe. Then we come up. Now I'm going to add this in here now, since a lot of times people don't stick through to the end of videos. I have to add this little disclaimer that although we're always looking for guests and always looking for new members, it is a private club and it is on private property. So we do not encourage trespassing on this property. We have cameras and security, so do not trespass here. But if you're interested and you want to come on a run day or a work day and sign a waiver and come in and say hi and check the place out, as long as members are here, you are more than welcome. You are more than welcome to come by. We would love to see you. Now we're on Mercer Bridge. I forget the full story of this bridge, but this is long before my time here. This was built. It was dedicated in '86. It was built earlier than that. I forget the exact years it was built. A.M. Mercer. Part of this was built at a college. I don't know. I've been here 11 years. You think I know some of this, some of this better? But this was Mercer. This was a design built by Mercer. So it was part of a college project or something. I forget the full story. But it's just kind of like one of the structural highlights of our line here. So we are right next to the beautiful Perkiomen Creek. Very scenic back here. It's one of my favorite parts of the railroad. So that's famous Mercer Bridge. The 1.5-inch gauge and the 1-inch gauge, or 1-inch scale, 1.5-inch scale, for the most part, goes side by side most of the track, most of the main line. Most of the main line, like I said, is the 1-inch and 1.5-inch goes side by side through most of it. Then you come up off the curve, off of Mercer, and then we're coming up here. This is where a lot of everything combines. The layout is basically like a collapsed horseshoe, like a collapsed figure 8, basically. So the part where the bridge goes underneath the layout, underneath the track, is kind of where the figure 8 on a figure 8 would cross itself. So once you get up here, you got the 1.5-inch scale, and again, because you basically come through this area twice when you're running. You come up, when you come up around, and as you come back around, the 1-inch and 1.5-inch scale both come back up here. Over here, if you look on the side, this is the multi-gauge track I talked about. You can see all the rail on here. That goes from 4 3/4 I think, down to 2.5 inch. There's 3, possibly 4 different gauges in here, different scales and gauges. I'm not too familiar with it. Honestly, all my time I've been here, I've never even went around the multi-gauge loop one time on a train. But I always like this section. Like I said, you actually, as you go around the track, you actually come by here twice. First, you come up on these 2 tracks, either inch or inch and a half. And as you come back around, you come back on here. Then you come on up the back stretch. The 1-inch scale guys have been putting some new sidings in. I like them all. I like all scales, all sizes, all kinds of these. I build 1.5 inch just because even like the model trains, like ones I run in my living room, I'll always like as big as I can afford and big as I can handle. So I go with 1.5 inch, just like, I mean, I'm also an S gauge guy, as you can tell if you watch my page. S gauge ain't the biggest model train, but bigger than HO and N. Let me come up here. That's our parking over there. Sometimes we have our big weekend spring meets and spring and fall meets. People camp out during the weekend. There's the ballast. There's some of our outbuildings for equipment. Passing siding for the 1.5 inch scale. And then, anyone who knows trains or railroading, this is the closest thing we have up here to a legitimate grade crossing. And the actual steam engines and have their whistles, and the diesels have their little horns of some sort. I run old car horns on my stuff. Coming on up here in the driveway. This is the driveway to enter the thing, and we have the lights and do the 2 shorts, a long, 2 longs, a short, and a long on the horn or whistle, just because cars will come through here as they're coming into the club. So it's the closest thing we have to a grade crossing. Then we have these. I always joke around, a little out of scale. I'd like to know where they came from. Another interesting note is we are located right next to the Perkiomen Trail, which was once the Perkiomen Railroad. When the club first moved here in 1970, the Perkiomen Railroad was still active. It's still coming through here. So it must have been pretty cool back then. You got the Perkiomen Railroad right there. Then you got the live steamers right next to it. Go imagine running your little train right next to a real, back then it was already Reading property, Reading Railroad at that point, but having the Reading Railroad engine come up next to you must have been pretty cool. So, well, I like to keep these videos fairly short-ish. So, this will be part 1. I'm going to do part 2 just to split it up. People have short attention spans these days, so you can't have videos too long. So, in case anyone's wondering about this caboose, this is actually a Union Pacific caboose. Kind of odd seeing a Union Pacific caboose this far out east. We actually painted the one side that the traffic sees. We actually painted this side a few years back for our 75th anniversary. I think eventually we're going to paint the whole caboose. Probably repaint it totally, get rid of all this too. But this is a Union Pacific caboose. I forget the guy's name, but oddly enough, back at one time, even though that's a West Coast, Midwest, West Coast Railroad, the president of Union Pacific actually lived in Pottstown, Pennsylvania, which is kind of odd that the president lived there while he was still serving as president. He lived right out here in Pottstown. Pottstown's not too far from here, maybe half hour, 40 minutes or so. So Pottstown's not all that far away. So I guess even if you're the president of a multi-billion-dollar railroad, you still can't get what you want to do at your own house. So what happened, story as it goes, he bought 2 Union Pacific cabooses, and he wanted to put them out back of his house for like guest houses or a pool house, or wanted to have them at his house out back. And apparently the neighbors weren't having it, and they complained about it and followed him somehow, so he couldn't put these cabooses out back of his house. So they sat around, unless I'm mistaken, they sat at Pottstown behind the station for many years. And then after he died, the president's wife donated one to the club, and the other one ended up in the Norristown Zoo. So if you ever go to the Norristown Zoo, that's where the other one of these, that's where this other caboose ended up at, was at Norristown. So we got this one, and I forget the exact year it came here. I'm thinking it was late 70s, mid 80s. Again, maybe for part 2 I'll research a little bit more info on that for the second part of this. But anyway, thanks again for checking this out. And like I said, I will continue the tour of the railroad, more of the railroad and some more history of it on another installment of this. You can see the rest of the track and all that. And also, like I said earlier, this is private property. We have security and we have cameras, so no trespassing. But if you're interested in the club, or you'd like to join us, or you would like to see what we're about, if you see people down here on a work day or something, or you're on one of our run days, you can come in, we'll sign you in as a guest, and you can see what this is about. And if you want to join, you can join, get involved. Always looking for more help and always looking for more volunteers. We're definitely open to more friendly faces. So if it's something you're interested in, you're definitely welcome to come check it out, as long as one of us are here. So all right, well, stay tuned. I'll finish the rest of the railroad and some more history on a second part. And thanks for tuning in.